here is my comprehensive Focal Bathys review and whether they're still worth close to $600 in 2025. In this video, we're going to do sound comparisons against its direct competition, including newer competition like the Bose Wilkins Px7 S3 and the equally premium banging Olufsen H95. Let's get into it. Hey there, if you're new to recordingnow.com, we're on a mission to build the most comprehensive database of unsponsored headphone and wireless earbud reviews, detailed head-to-head comparisons, and overall rankings to help you make a more informed purchase. I use my background in pro audio to create custom EQ settings for all of these headphones, including the Focal Bathys, to get the most sound quality potential out of them. To access those settings, click the link to the full blog post in the video description or in a pinned comment below. You can also use the chat bot on the website in the bottom right to type in the model name plus EQ. Alright, so starting with comfort, the Bathys is actually the second heaviest headphone that I've weighed in this class. The only thing heavier is the Apple AirPods Max at 387 grams, the Bathys at 357 grams. To put this into perspective, one of the lighter headphones in this class is the XM6 at 252 grams, so over 100 grams lighter than the Bathys. So when it comes to comfort, this is definitely going to be a mixed bag for most people. I think it's a mixture of that heavier weight along with not having the most plush headband here. This really could use a lot more cushioning, and these have quite a bit of clamping force due to this very sturdy metal headband here. Now for me, I actually find the Bathys to be about the same comfort as the Apple AirPods Max, but I actually prefer the earpad cushions, which are more plush compared to the AirPods Max here. And I like that there's a ton of interior ear cup space, so my ears are completely free inside the ear cups. So for me personally, I could actually wear the Bathys for hours once you get used to it. So I give them a 4 out of 5, but I could totally see some people giving them between a 3 to a 3.5 out of 5. So moving on to features, build quality, battery life, and noise canceling performance, which we'll combine into a single score. So starting with the hardshell case that it comes with, this reminds me a ton of the Momentum 4's hardshell case in both shape and size. I would say this is about average size, and as you can see, the Bathys does not fold. Now when it comes to features, the Bathys is a little bit older now, having been released in October 2022, so we have a bit of an older Bluetooth 5.1 with aptX adaptive and not lossless to my knowledge, or LDAC, but you do have most of those modern features like multiple built-in microphones, multi-point connection, transparency mode. So one really cool feature of the Bathys that is unique is you have this DAC mode, which is awesome because you get to connect these using USB-C to stereo or USB-C to USB-C, and basically you turn it to this DAC mode and it has an inbuilt DAC for enhanced wired listening. And I've got to say, this is definitely one of my favorite features because it really enhances the sound quality while also extending the battery life. So if you're able to listen to these in wired mode at your desk, you are going to have a more enhanced experience. All right, so moving on to build quality, I actually find it to be very good here. So we start with this metal headband, which is really confidence inspiring and just feels so solid. But I think one of the drawbacks of this is that this is probably the source of the clamping force and the reason why it's not really going to loosen up much over time. For the rest of the headphone, the reason why it weighs so much is because it uses premium materials like metal in the headband, the hinges. We have these really nice leather earpad cushions, which are very plush. And then we have this suede-like material on the headband, which again, I wish it had more cushioning underneath. And then we have this premium leather on the exterior of the headband. So overall for build quality, I do think these are worthy of their $600 to $700 price tag. For battery life, the Bathys is rated at over 30 hours on a single charge, which is slightly above average. The current class leader is the Cambridge Audio P100 at 100 hours. But then we have something like the AirPods Max at just 20 hours and a bunch of headphones like the Px7 S3 at 30 hours as well. All right, so let's talk about the noise canceling performance of the Bathys, which in my opinion is the biggest disappointment of these headphones aside from the comfort. So I would rate the Bathys towards the lower end of the class for its noise canceling performance. This would be with headphones like the Sennheiser Momentum 4 and the Cambridge Audio P100. I think it can be decent at times when you set to the full active noise canceling and you're playing music at a moderate volume. But simply put, it's not on the level of the elite noise canceling options today like the Sony XM6, Bose QC Ultra. Even the Bose Wilkins Px7 S3 is much improved over the previous generation of the Px8 and the S2e. So I would consider the Bathys to maybe be average to below average for noise canceling. Overall, for features, build quality, battery life, and the noise canceling performance, I give the Bathys a 4 out of 5, and it would be due for an update, which I believe the more high-end and newer MG is supposed to fix, but I haven't had a chance to test that yet. All right, so let's move on to sound quality, which is where these headphones really shine. It's what these headphones are known for. So starting with the stock sound out of the box, I was immediately impressed by the Bathys. No EQ required, just a very balanced and tastefully tuned stock sound profile and tonality. It just struck me as being balanced compared to most of these consumer headphones in the wireless active noise canceling class that tend to veer towards that really consumer friendly, overly bassy, too treble forward, mids recessed sound profile. I felt that the Bathys was a lot more balanced and I could hear everything basically, while at the same time having a wider soundstage and sounding like one of the most open back headphones in this very much closed back headphone class, where a lot of these headphones can sound quite compressed and quite closed in and narrow. What jumped out to me was that bigger soundstage, the better spacing, and just being able to breathe between the different instruments, voices, and layers. Now, interestingly, it wasn't until comparing back to back with the Cambridge Audio P100 that I actually heard the Bathys was a little bit veiled in the vocals. So that brings us to EQ. There is a 5-band EQ in the Focal app, and I've heard some mixed reviews about the EQ, but thankfully we are actually able to use this to get even better sound quality, in my opinion, from the Bathys, which I already thought was excellent stock. I didn't really think it could get much better, but what we were able to do was make those vocals less veiled and more vocal forward as a whole, and also add more sub bass with taming that mid bass, which is very punchy and very impressive out of the box. But I do think it could use a little more oomph in the sub bass, which is one of the focuses, and overall a bit livelier with more energy in the mids and a touch of airiness up top. So EQ, to my surprise, was actually able to make the Bathys, which was already excellent sounding out of the box, even better. So we're going to talk about some sound comparisons before we wrap up the sound quality section. So, all right, so let's start with one of the more popular latest models, the Sony XM6. Clearly, to my ear, despite the XM6 having a 10-band EQ, despite being much newer, I really think the Bathys is in a different level. It's in that high end of the wireless noise canceling headphone class, and it's just so hard to compare because the soundstage, it's so much bigger, it's so much more open, and there's just more clarity and detail overall compared to the XM6, which I think for around $450, again, with that 10-band EQ, and I have 3 settings for the XM6 to really dial it in for certain genres. At the end of the day, there's no mistaking that the hardware and the audiophile technicalities is simply something that you just cannot add to the XM6. It's limited by its hardware. But where I do think the XM6 has a slight advantage is in the sub bass, which is a little bit on the lighter side for the Bathys. Now, a much closer sound comparison with an equally new Bowers & Wilkins Px7 S3, where this is much more competitive and in line. That said, the S3 is very V-shaped out of the box, so this is going to be already more consumer friendly, and it does have more impressive and satisfying sub bass, but overall, the Bathys can make the Px7 sound like it has a small, narrow soundstage. Overall, don't get me wrong, the Px7 S3 is a very technically strong sounding headphone. It's detailed, it's crisp, but overall, I still find the Bathys to match it when it comes to anything audiophile, but also just being a more engaging and fun headphone to listen to as a whole. All right, so one interesting headphone we have here is the Bowers & Wilkins Px8. So these have different sound profiles. The Px8 is a warm, lush, darker sound, and the Bathys is more balanced with having more detail and having more impact with its bass, sub bass, and treble, whereas the Bowers & Wilkins really just focuses on those mids. The soundstage is also less impressive. It's smaller and more intimate on the Px8, which can work for some genres, but overall, I do prefer the Bathys all around. So the AirPods Max has a more consumer-friendly sound out of the box, but EQing the Bathys, we're able to match that in terms of making it more engaging while having more audiophile detail and better dynamics and resolution than the AirPods Max. But the AirPods Max still has pretty good separation and layering that is competitive. All right, so a couple other fun contenders here. We have the Bose QC Ultra, where I just think that the Bathys does everything that the QC Ultra does and then some. There's just a higher level of resolution and clarity that we get with the Bathys and better dynamics. But one thing the QC Ultra does really well is it has a lot of detail after you EQ them, and it's never sibilant, it's smoother, whereas the Bathys struggles with sibilance once we start messing with that 5-band EQ. And then we have the Momentum 4, which for its price, honestly, one of the best values for the dollar. And I've heard some people refer to the Momentum 4 as the baby Bathys. having that audiophile level of sound quality with great tonality, and especially after dialing in my V2 EQ. Funny enough, the inspiration for that EQ was listening to the Bathys back to back and trying to get the Momentum 4 to be more competitive and in line, and I'm very happy with the result. But overall, the Bathys is a logical step forward if you're looking for an upgrade to the Momentum 4 and you already love the sound quality but just want to get to that next level. I do think the Bathys makes sense as a worthy upgrade. All right, so out of the whole entire pack, I think there's two headphones that are actually competitive with the Bathys. That would be the Bang & Olufsen H95 and the Cambridge Audio Melomania P100. Now, interestingly, the Bathys was the most veiled sounding out of the box with its stock sound profile versus the P100 and the H95, which are more detailed and brighter headphones. That said, I would say that the Bathys is the smoother headphone of the three, but once we start to increase the volume and mess with EQ, it can get a little bit peaky in the treble and a little bit sibilant at times, which I was a little surprised, a little bit disappointed with. Now, all three of these have pretty large soundstage, but I think the Bathys still has the widest and the biggest soundstage here. Definitely compared to the P100, it's a little bit better. The P100 actually has deeper sub bass along with the H95. So sub bass is one advantage to two of these versus the Bathys, which is more about its punchy mid bass. Out of these three, the Bathys is my favorite. I think it's still the most balanced even after EQing, but definitely the stock sound profile. I just think it gets its tuning right and it's very tastefully done. The H95 is a very engaging, exciting, and detailed headphone to listen to, but can actually become even more peaky and sibilant in the treble. And then the P100 is very detailed, but is probably the least consumer friendly out of these three headphones. It kind of has a little bit more of a studio monitor headphone, just a very detailed sound that I personally love, but is probably the least exciting of these three. All right, so one more shout out for the sound quality that I want to bring up is that USB DAC mode. So when you're listening to these in that wired mode, you are going to get more clarity, more resolution, and actually having less sibilance. It's going to be smoother in the treble. But the one caveat is the low end and the bass is going to be very light compared to what you get through the Bluetooth, especially adding the EQ where we're giving a slight bump to the sub bass. You're not going to get that kind of sub bass in the wired mode. But overall, the mids, the treble, they're going to open up nicely. And I do really prefer listening to these in that USB DAC mode, although with the new EQ, I gotta say they're more fun to listen to and wireless as well. So overall for sound quality, the Bathys gets a 9.4 out of 10 after EQ, one of the highest scores we've given out for pure sound quality. Really, this is an audiophile level headphone that happens to be wireless and have active noise canceling. So in some ways, the Bathys is a pioneer in this class of headphones, and personally is one of my favorite headphones to listen to currently. All right, so moving on to value. Now that the Bathys is a couple years older, it originally retailed at $699 USD, but today, market price, you can find them for around $590 brand new to as low as $524 at the time of this writing. If you're willing to look at used like new, prices can be under $500. We're gonna have links to where you can access those prices in the video description and in the pinned comment below. So I gotta say, with 2025's prices, I think that this actually makes the Focal Bathys a lot more attractive than it was at the $700 price point. Now, if we're only looking at sound quality, that is where I do think that the Bathys is worthy of its price, because I'm simply just not getting the kind of audiophile enjoyment from these other headphones from really most of that sub $600, sub $500 headphone class. But now getting down to under $600, I do think that makes the Bathys a little bit of a better value than before. So the real drawback to these headphones is going to be that heavy weight and that lack of comfort. It's also going to be that average to below average active noise canceling, which is one of the biggest reasons to even look at this class of headphones. So originally I was going to give the Bathys a 3.5 out of 5 for value, which I felt was fair because I think its sound quality is redeeming enough that I still think they are worth $700. Like, I would personally be willing to spend that, but now that they're available for less than $600, maybe even closer to that $500 if you're willing to look at used like new, then that's where I think the value score actually gets up to a 4 out of 5, because what you're getting with the sound quality is simply something that I haven't seen matched yet for the price and for this class. All right, so rounding up the overall score for the Focal Bathys, we have an 8.6 out of 10. To summarize, I think the Bathys is the best sounding headphone under $1,000 that I've tested currently. but where it falls short is as an overall product. It's heavy. For some people, it may be uncomfortable, especially if you have a larger head. I personally don't find them to be too uncomfortable or less comfortable than the AirPods Max, for example, but definitely its noise canceling is not something that you're going to want to rely on if you're going to do a lot of traveling. If you really need that world-class noise canceling, this is not going to be it. But overall, for my money, I would purchase the Focal Bathys, and I'd be looking at that new stealth black colorway, which is less gaudy and flashy as the original gray and black colorway I have right here on the desk. That one I actually saw for $524 on Amazon. That's a great deal for these headphones. If we're talking alternatives, two I want to bring up are going to be that H95, which is going to be considerably more expensive. I think the last time I checked, these were maybe around $800. In that sense, the H95 is definitely a worse value, but it does have much better noise canceling in my experience, while retaining that level of high-end sound quality. The Bowers & Wilkins Px7 S3 is going to be $450, going to have much better noise canceling, going to be more comfortable as well, while having somewhat competitive sound quality. But to me, I do think there is a line that is drawn between the Bathys, the H95, the P100. They're definitely in a class above the Px7 S3. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this comprehensive, detailed review, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment below. Your support goes a long way in helping the channel. If you have any questions about any of these headphones, leave in the comments. I try to get back to as many as possible. If you want to see the rest of our content or access any of the EQ settings for these headphones, visit recordingnow.com. Again, link in the video description or in a pinned comment below. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, because we have a ton more headphone and consumer audio content on the way soon. I'm going to link a relevant video and a playlist so you can keep watching next. Thanks for watching and happy listening.